There are deaths that make headlines, and then there are deaths that make the world go quiet for a moment before it starts talking all at once. On Tuesday, August 25, 2026, country music lost Dolly Parton, dead at 80 after a brief and largely private battle with cancer, and for a few hours the internet did something it almost never does anymore. It stopped arguing. It started grieving together out loud. Her family broke the news the way Dolly herself would have wanted it broken, not through a press release stamped with lawyers' language, but through her nephew, Brian Seaver, speaking directly into a camera on her Instagram account. He said Dolly had been sister, sis, Aunt Granny to one generation and Gigi to the next. He said she never saw a door she couldn't open, and that the doors she opened changed history for people who never even got to meet her. It was warm and plain-spoken, exactly like the woman it was describing. And it set off one of the largest, most emotionally raw waves of celebrity tribute this decade has seen. Tonight we're going to walk through it properly, not just the headlines, but the people behind them. Because the tributes that came in for Dolly Parton weren't identical. They weren't copy-paste condolences from a publicist's desk. Every single one of them carried the specific shape of the relationship it came from. A goddaughter's grief looks different from a duet partner's grief, which looks different again from the grief of someone who spent 40 years in the same industry, fighting the same fights at the same time. Tonight, we're looking at three of those voices in particular: Miley Cyrus, Sabrina Carpenter, and Reba McEntire. Three women, three different decades of connection to Dolly, and three tributes that, together, tell you almost everything you need to know about who she really was. Start with the relationship that goes back the furthest. Dolly Parton became Miley Cyrus's godmother before Miley could walk. The connection ran through Miley's father, Billy Ray Cyrus, who toured with Dolly in the early 1990s after Achy Breaky Heart made him a star. The two became close, and when Miley was born in November 1992, Billy Ray asked Dolly to be her godmother. She said yes. She stayed involved for the rest of her life, showing up on set during the Hannah Montana years as Aunt Dolly, singing Jolene alongside Miley on The Voice, showing up not as a guest star doing a favor but as family doing what family does. So when the news broke, Miley didn't wait for a statement to be drafted or approved. Within minutes, she was on X. Her first post was short and it hit like a gut punch. She said the world had lost the purest soul, told Dolly to rest in glory, and admitted her heart ached. A few minutes later, she posted again, because apparently one sentence wasn't enough for 3 decades of love. She wrote that Dolly had transcended time and now lived on in the hearts of entire generations. Read those words again and notice what's missing. There's no press-trained polish to them. No careful reference to an icon or a legacy. It's the language of someone who lost a person, not a public figure. And that tracks with everything Miley has said over the years about what Dolly meant to her. Not a mentor at arm's length, but someone who was simply, unconditionally there, through every reinvention, every headline, every version of Miley Cyrus the public tried to define and redefine without her permission. Dolly loved the whole of her, not the commercially convenient parts, and that kind of love leaves a mark you don't fully understand until the person offering it is gone. Sabrina Carpenter's connection to Dolly is much newer, but it turned out to carry weight far beyond its length. In February 2025, Carpenter and Parton teamed up on a new version of Please 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 from the deluxe edition of Carpenter's album Short and Sweet, a pairing that, on paper, looked almost improbable. The reigning pop star of the moment next to the woman who wrote Jolene in a single afternoon more than 50 years earlier. In practice, it worked, because Dolly had spent her whole career proving that genre and generation were never really the point. The music video for that collaboration put the two of them on set together, laughing, posing, building the kind of easy rapport that doesn't happen on command. When Parton died, Carpenter didn't reach for a formal statement. She posted a black and white gallery of photos from that shoot, with a caption that read almost like a diary entry. "Oh, Dolly," she began, before recalling exactly what she blurted out the first time they met, that Dolly really is an angel walking the earth, and in the same breath, that the two of them look like we could be sisters. She wrote that she would carry Dolly's wisdom, her playful outlook, and her sense of humor with her for the hard days ahead, and that there would never be another Dolly, that the world had been lucky simply to witness her singular magic while she was here. It's worth sitting with the phrase Carpenter used twice, first in person and then again in grief, an angel walking the earth. It's not the kind of line you plan. It's the kind of line that falls out of you when you meet someone who genuinely doesn't operate like the rest of the industry, someone whose warmth isn't a performance skill but an actual personality trait, applied evenly to everyone in the room, famous or not. Carpenter closed her tribute by borrowing Dolly's own words back to her, "I will always love you." And then there's Reba McEntire, whose tribute carries a different kind of gravity entirely, because it isn't the grief of someone discovering Dolly's magnitude, it's the grief of someone who lived through the same era, the same industry, the same uphill climb, right alongside her. McEntire was born in Oklahoma in 1955, 9 years after Dolly came into the world in a one-room cabin in the Smoky Mountains. Both women spent decades building careers in a business that was, for most of their working lives, run almost entirely by men who decided how far a woman's ambition was allowed to go. Both of them ignored that ceiling completely. McEntire's tribute, posted the day of Dolly's death, called her "my buddy Dolly," not the legend, not a country icon, just buddy, the word you use for someone who has actually sat across a table from you for 40 years. She thanked Dolly for everything she'd given the world through her love, her music, and what McEntire called her huge heart, and said flatly that there would never be another one like her. She promised to remember and cherish every note Dolly ever sang. Then she said something that landed harder than almost anything else posted that day. She said she'd never forget the first time she met Dolly, and she'd never forget their last conversation, which she said she holds with love in her heart. Nobody knows what was said in that final conversation, and nobody needs to. That's the kind of detail that isn't meant for an audience. But the fact that McEntire mentioned it at all tells you that somewhere in Dolly's final weeks, two old friends found a moment to say what mattered most, while there was still time to say it. McEntire closed her tribute the way a lot of people who knew Dolly well did, with faith rather than despair, saying she believed Dolly was already reunited in heaven with the people she'd loved and lost, including her husband of nearly 6 decades, Carl Dean, who had died the previous year. Those 3 tributes didn't arrive alone. They arrived inside a much larger wave that, within hours, had pulled in almost every corner of American culture. Paul McCartney, who first met Dolly at the Grand Ole Opry back in 1974 when she was still stepping out of Porter Wagoner's shadow, wrote that her singing, her songwriting, and her philanthropy were unrivaled in country music, and that it was hard to imagine a world without her. Casey Musgraves posted a short, unguarded burst of grief that boiled down to 3 words, "This really hurts." Lily Tomlin, her co-star from 9 to 5, offered no elaborate statement at all, just no words, and a broken heart. Shania Twain called her a mentor and a hero of grace and humility. Country star after country star, actor after actor, all reaching for the same handful of truths, that she was singular, that she was kind, and that nothing about her warmth had ever been an act. Then came the moment that made even casual observers sit up. President Trump posted on Truth Social that Dolly Parton's death was a true loss for millions of people, writing that there had never been anyone like her, and never would be. He ordered flags across the country lowered to half-staff for a full week, an honor typically reserved for heads of state, not entertainers. It's a detail worth pausing on, not for political reasons, but because Dolly Parton spent her entire public life deliberately staying out of the political fray. She turned down the Presidential Medal of Freedom on more than one occasion, for more than one administration, specifically because she didn't want her legacy read as a political statement. That a nation this divided could, for 1 week, agree on lowering a flag for a rhinestone-covered woman from a one-room cabin in Tennessee says something about how rare her kind of unifying presence actually was. Line all of these up next to each other: the goddaughter, the duet partner, the 40-year friend, the Beatle, the president, and a pattern starts to emerge that's easy to miss if you only skim the headlines. Almost none of these tributes reached for the word legend first. They reached for smaller, more personal words. Buddy, angel, sister, the purest soul. These are not the words people use to describe a career. They're the words people use to describe a person who made them feel specifically, individually seen, and who apparently did that for everyone she ever met, at scale, for 60 years, without it ever curdling into performance. That's the real story behind tonight's flood of tributes. It isn't really about a country singer's discography, astonishing as that discography is. It's about a woman who somehow managed to be one of the most famous people on the planet while remaining, by every account from the people who actually knew her, completely unchanged by it. Miley Cyrus got the version of Dolly who showed up for a scared kid growing up in an industry that chews people apart. Sabrina Carpenter got the version of Dolly who could make a pop star half her age feel like she'd just met a member of her own family within minutes of shaking her hand. Reba McEntire got the version of Dolly who fought the same industry battles she did, decade after decade, and never once treated her like competition. Different decades. Different relationships. Same woman, all the way through. Dolly Parton was born with nothing in a cabin with no electricity and no running water, and she died as someone whose passing briefly made an entire fractured country agree on something. In between, she wrote the songs, funded the libraries, opened the doors, and, according to nearly everyone who was ever in a room with her, made each of those people feel like the most important person in it. That is not something you can manufacture with a publicist. That has to be real over and over again, for decades, in front of people who would have noticed the moment it wasn't. If you have your own memory of what Dolly Parton's music meant to you, a song that got you through something, a lyric you didn't fully understand until years later, that's worth holding on to tonight. Because if the tributes from Miley, Sabrina, and Reba tell us anything, it's that the people who knew her best experienced exactly the same thing millions of strangers did listening to her records, the unmistakable feeling that she was singing directly to them. That was never an accident. That was the whole point. Rest in glory, Dolly. The world already sounds a little quieter without you in it.